All right, chapter 2B. So, continuing on with colonization, and we will start with Brazil. All right. So Brazil's sugar plantations. So by 1590, the Portuguese colonists had transformed coastal Brazil into a sugar plantation zone. So remember, they start there in about the 1530s, 1540s. And so it becomes full-on sugar plantation zone by then. This is going to include both sugar cultivation and milling, extracting, and refining operations. The diminished Indian population's inability to provide sufficient labor leads colonists to import growing numbers of African slaves. So by 1620, Brazil is a sugar colony based on a slave labor system, and more specifically, an African slave labor system. The first commercial production of sugar was undertaken in 1550, derived principally from techniques from Madeira. So remember, Madeira is that island off of the coast of Africa, and I can't remember which country right now, but Morocco, off the coast of Morocco. So you have definitely slaves in the United States, not in the United States, I'm sorry, in Americas, prior to the English coming over, and definitely prior to when they joined North America. So just keep that in mind. All right. So this is a map here. This is going to show you all of the plantation colonies. Brazil is a plantation colony. All of those ones in red are going to be plantation colonies as well. Obviously not all Portuguese, but they are going to be based off of that model. Okay, so what kind of plantation colonies do we have other than sugar? One of them is going to be tobacco. So Jamestown, 1606, charter granted to the Virginia Company for land from present-day North Carolina to southern New York. Primary goal was trade with the native people. In 1607, traders, which mind you are going to be all men at this point, are sent for economic ventures. The settlement fails horribly. People are not prepared for the weather. They are not prepared for the conditions. You can see that they've built their town in kind of like a fort-like setup where they're surrounded on all sides. They don't really know how to, they really just thought they were going to come over and everything was going to be handy-dandy. They're going to trade with the natives and life is going to be good. Unfortunately, that is not what happens. 38 of the 120 men were alive after only 9 months. Many are destroyed by disease, warfare, and famine. And who are they warring with? Well, the Indians, the natives. All right. Powhatan, or the who is leader of the Algonquins, is going to forge relations with settlers later on. He is going to marry his daughter, the famed Pocahontas, to a man named John Rolfe. So I think in the Disney version, she marries John Smith, but in real life, she marries John Rolfe. Rolfe is going to produce tobacco in the region. Production of tobacco and the availability of land grants is going to encourage migration to the region. And migration largely from England. 1619, you have the House of Burgesses convened to make laws and levy taxes. This is going to be the first kind of organized European government in the colonies. There is plenty of government going on with the native populations, though. All right, 1622, you have an Indian War. So Powhatan's brother, who again is leader of the Algonquins, father to Pocahontas, his name is Opechancanough. Opechancanough? Anyway, he leads an unsuccessful uprising in 1607. And he is going to capture our friend John Smith. Later he becomes chief and he vows another uprising. So this is where Pocahontas comes in. She does kind of encourage her dad and his brother to let John Smith go. And so that's where you get the Pocahontas-John Smith relationship, but it is not through a marriage or any kind of relationship in that fact. The 1622 revolt is going to kill 347 English settlers, King James is going to revoke the charter, and he's going to make Virginia a royal colony in 1624. So this is James the First. Settlers now follow English rule. They appoint governors. They appoint a government, a governor. They elect an assembly. They have a formal legal system and the Anglican Church. Later on, you're going to get Lord Baltimore. So one of the biggest myths is that people come over here strictly for religious freedom. Not entirely true. It's partially true. So Lord Baltimore, and this is actually a portrait of Lord Baltimore right here, and his son Calvin, I think is his name. Yeah. His son is named Calvin, no, not Calvin, Cecil. So Lord Baltimore's Calvin. Cecil Calvert is his son right there. So this is Lord Baltimore. Maryland is going to be another tobacco-growing colony. It is created by King Charles's granting of land to Lord Baltimore. His name is Cecilius Calvert, and his son Cecil. And it becomes a refuge for Catholics, which is funny because never at any point were there more Catholics than there were Protestants in Maryland. The population does grow quickly. And the reason you have so many Christians is in 1649, they passed the Toleration Act, which grants all Christians in the colony the right to religious freedom. And so Maryland becomes this colony where kind of everybody is tolerated and accepted. It is known as the colony for Catholics. That is why it was originally established. It never really becomes the colony of the Catholics. You have plenty of Catholics there, but they're not the dominant group. In this portrait here, you have Lord Baltimore with his son, Cecil Calvert. I'm sorry, his grandson. The little African-American boy there is likely his caretaker. And this is going to really show Lord Baltimore's wealth. And the fact that he is an African servant is kind of foreshadowing or foretelling the African slavery history that is going to occur. All right. So here we have different areas colonized by 1660, and this is going to be in North America. All right. So you have a Spanish colony down in Florida, St. Augustine. The French have New France. You have England, who's got Virginia and Maryland. And then the Netherlands is going to have New Amsterdam, which is now New York. All right. Okay. Other places. Oh, and just on a side note about Pocahontas. So she does marry John Rolfe. John Rolfe takes her back to England at a point. And she actually does not survive that trip. So she becomes ill during the preparations returning back to Virginia, probably from diseases that still don't exist in America. So she dies in March of 1617. It was buried there. So John Rolfe brings his, actually he doesn't. He stays in England. He doesn't bring his son. I was to say he brings his son. But no, he leaves his son in England with his brother and does return back to North America, into Virginia, but he never sees his son again. So he does marry again and has other, well, I think he has other children, but anyway, that's the real Pocahontas story. All right, plantation colonies. So the Caribbean islands. So European colonization in 1624, you have the English and the French colonists. So you have St. Kitts in the Caribbean by English and French. 1655, the French are going to also occupy Martinique, Guadeloupe, and St. Bart's. And the English are going to occupy Nevis, Antigua, Montserrat, Anguilla, Tortola, Barbados, and Jamaica. And the Dutch are going to occupy St. Eustatius. So when you go to these Caribbean islands, even today, their history of English or French or Dutch colonization is going to be prevalent, and it's going to explain a lot of the differences between these Caribbean islands. England, France, and Holland are going to establish plantation economies in the region, and after experimentation with tobacco, indigo, cotton, cacao, or chocolate, and ginger, many planters are going to shift to sugar cultivation wherever possible, because it is the most profitable, because in addition to table sugar and sweetening things, it also makes rum. All right, and so rum is going to be an important commodity. All right. So this is the process of sugar refining in the French West Indies. It includes European sugar planters, and you can see they are kind of at the front, chit-chatting with each other, not really doing anything. You have plantation laborers who are black and dressed in minimal clothing appropriate for the tropical setting. It is very hot there. If you've ever been there, you know. The machinery suggests that it's expensive and requires substantial capital. And you can see like some of the Europeans are kind of off to the side. They're there kind of overseeing, but not really participating. The workers are black, likely enslaved. But it does require a lot of skill to do this type of work, even though it is manual labor. Okay, so on plantations, you have actually both indentured servants and African laborers. And we have been working on an assignment lately, kind of working between the difference between those two. But just to give you a quick explanation, by 1700, more than 100,000 English migrants had come to Chesapeake as indentured servants. Many were men seeking land and opportunity who could not afford a passage. Some were women. So basically there would be all kinds of ads and things, and you would basically trade your time, your life, to get passage over to the New World, and once you get there and served your time, land a lot of times. All right. Problem is they are exploited. Many of them are going to die before their indentured time has ended. And those who survived did not generally receive what they had been promised. They didn't get the land they were promised, etc. So you do have a lot of indentured servants. You do have a lot of white laborers in our early history. In 1619, John Rolfe noted first Africans sold in the Chesapeake. So that's when we first get our first African slaves, in 1619. The value of tobacco is going to decline, and landowners are going to desire ways to make a profit despite declining prices. And how do you do that? With free labor. So African labor is basically cheaper than white labor. So first off, you buy them once and you keep them forever, or you sell them again. It's not like an indentured servant where once their time is up, they're gone. They concluded that this African labor is cheaper. Residents of the Chesapeake become increasingly race conscious, referring to color, white and black. And so the fact of the matter is the only people that are sold into slavery are Africans. And that is where you're going to start to get this big divide between color, is the fact that some are, most of them are Africans, and they definitely have black skin versus white. The indentured servants eventually earn their freedom, which was not always an option for an African. All right, this is just a map. Yeah, a map of the Chesapeake Whites, 1640 to 1700. Your other colonies, so New France. So in the 1530s, Jacques Cartier ventured up the St. Lawrence River and claimed it for France. 1608, Samuel de Champlain founded the fur trading post of Quebec up in Canada. The French traded manufactured goods and guns to Native Americans in the region for beaver pelts and other furs which were popular in Europe. So the French are going to start to have a different type of relationship with the natives than the English do. The English want their land. The French just want money, so they're going to trade with them. Whereas the English are going to be pushing the natives further west. From 1625 to 1763, you have Jesuit missionaries. Hundreds of French Jesuit priests lived among the Indian peoples, and these are Catholics, okay? And they come to understand and respect them. And so their goal does not become conversion like the Spanish. With the Spanish, if they were going to convert you, they were going to convert you. Whether it was through your death or through you just pretending, you being beaten, whatever the case is, Spanish were going to convert you, they were going to convert you. The French, on the other hand, they understood these natives, and so the conversion is going to fail when the Indians do not see results from the use of Christian prayers, and the Jesuits aren't going to fight it. They're going to be like, alrighty, we respect you, that's fine. Alright, 1662, King Louis XIV is going to make New France a royal colony, but migration and farming is going to languish. New France's population remains small. Again, things in France aren't too terrible, so there's really not a reason for people to move to the Americas. France eventually claims a vast quantity of land from the St. Lawrence Valley through the Great Lakes and down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. So by 1718, Robert de La Salle had founded the port of New Orleans at the mouth of the Mississippi. So that's where you get your Creole and your French Cajun, etc., because they make it down the Mississippi to New Orleans. All right, the Dutch. So 1609, with Dutch support, Englishman Henry Hudson locates a wealth of fur along a river in present-day New York. In 1621, they founded the colony of New Netherland, sending farmers and artisans to the region to build a community. The new colony is going to fail. Small population of Holland initially is going to be a reason why you don't have a lot of migrants. A lot of them aren't going to go to North America. Again, they don't really have a reason to. West India Company grants land to wealthy Dutch along the Hudson who were unsuccessful in populating their estates. So you don't have a large population of Dutch people there. Your settlers have hostile relations with the Algonquin neighbors, and they're going to form an uneasy alliance with the Mohawks. The Dutch are going to focus on business propositions and profits and not land acquisition. So again, they're going to have a different relationship with the natives. New Netherland had a diverse population of Dutch, English, and Swedish. England invaded and took control of the colony in 1664. Leadership is not very certain at this time. Dutch culture remains, but the political control was contested. 1699, a colonist observes regions was like a conquered foreign province. So the English do invade, they do take over, they call it New York, but all the Dutch people still live there. So that's going to definitely be something of interest. This is an image of New Amsterdam in 1640. It's kind of like a fort, like a trading post, as opposed to farming and agriculture and things like that. The Eurasian trade system right here. So this is another map of trade, and you can see the orange, the Portuguese along Brazil, the Spanish control, which is going to be over on the western coast of South America into where modern-day Mexico is, New Mexico, Arizona, and over across the Gulf into Florida. And then your Dutch control is going to be green, which is going to be very minimal. It's going to be largely islands, little bitty area up in North America. All right, your other European colonies. So the 5 nations of the Iroquois are going to barter with French and Dutch traders for European guns. Their population is going to grow quickly and become very powerful with the use of European weapons. So again, they have a different type of relationship with the French and the Dutch because they're traders, and so not so great with the English though. Aggressively attacking other groups, which really killing the men, capturing the women and children. In the 1660s, New France is going to be committed to an all-out war against the Iroquois. 1667, the 5 nations in New France admit defeat. They accept Jesuit missionaries into their communities and settle in the St. Lawrence Valley. So your 5 nations, Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. The Iroquois in New York survived the war with France and forged new alliances with Englishmen who had taken control of New Netherland. They remain a dominant force in politics of the Northeast for generations to come. So that is going to be your end of kind of that 5 nations of the Iroquois. All right, your Pilgrims. We all know about the Pilgrims. Religious separatists who left the Church of England. They initially go to the Netherlands. They live among the Dutch Calvinists in Holland. 35 of them then migrate to America along with 67 who had left England. They were led by William Bradford aboard our favorite ship, the Mayflower. Their first winter is extremely harsh, and they only half survive until spring. When spring comes, they build a community of houses, they plant crops, and by 1640, they had 3,000 settlers because of worsening religious tensions in England. So even more people will start to migrate over to North America. 1630, John Winthrop, Massachusetts Bay. He's going to lead 900 Puritans to America, different than the Pilgrims, and become the first governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony. He wants to create an ideal city upon a hill. The Joint Stock Corporation was transformed into a representative government with council and assembly ruled by the godly. The Puritans limited voting rights to those who were members of the church, unlike Plymouth Colony. So this is going to be your first settlement. Massachusetts Bay, which becomes Massachusetts, is going to be very largely controlled by the Puritans. All right. Whereas with the Pilgrims, you don't have to be of their religion to participate in their government. All right. Massachusetts Bay is purged of all of their dissenters. Rogers Williams, he was a Puritan minister in Salem who opposed establishing Congregationalism as official religion of the colony and advocated tolerance. Well, these people of Massachusetts Bay are not interested in what Roger Williams has to say. So he also questions the practice of taking Indian land. So, of course, they're doing that left and right. They don't want anybody questioning them. So he becomes banished in 1636. So he's going to establish Providence on the land purchased from the Narragansett Indians. And in 1644, he establishes a new colony called Rhode Island. So with no legally established church and religious tolerance. So this is going to be another colony of religious tolerance. And no religious church. No church of the colony. Anne Hutchinson. So her biggest crime is she spoke up. She's the wife and mother of 7. She held weekly prayer meetings for women and made accusations against Boston ministers. She believed in a covenant of grace, not works declared that God revealed divine truth to individuals and not only through ministers. Puritan belief that women were inferior to men hastened officials' angers towards Hutchinson, and so they banished her in 1637. She also settled in Rhode Island, and so that's her biggest crime is she spoke up and she was a woman. So don't do that in that time period. Your origins of your Massachusetts Puritans, right there in that map. All right, and our other colonies here. Religious war is going to break out in England. So English Puritans and Scottish Presbyterians demand religious reform and parliamentary power. They do not get it. After years of civil war, Oliver Cromwell is going to emerge victorious. So in 1649, you get a Republican Commonwealth that is declared. Elaborate rituals and bishops were banned from the Church of England. He dies in 1660 and the crown is restored. This restoration of the monarchy is going to dash Puritan hopes to return to England. Puritan colonies now stand as outposts of Calvinism and the Atlantic Republican tradition. Let's see. Puritans saw signs of God and Satan in the physical world, so birth defects with Satan, storms, unusual events, these are all going to be signs of Satan. Many Christians incorporated some pagan practices into their daily lives. They condemned those who claimed powers as healers or prophets. So between 1647 and 1662, 14 New Englanders were hanged for witchcraft. 1692 episode in Salem was America's most dramatic episode of witch hunting. Some young girls claimed to experience seizures and accused neighbors of bewitching them. And the accusations spin out of control. Massachusetts Bay tries 175 people for witchcraft and executes 19 of them. So likely at some point during your English career this year, you will read the play on the Salem witch trials, which I can't remember what it's called right now. I'm having a lapse in brain. One day I'll remember all these things. Anyway, the debate continues among historians as whether the witchcraft hysteria was the result of class differences or efforts to control or limit the activities of women in the colonies. Either way, they weren't really witches, and it does spin way out of control. Charges of witchcraft were significantly reduced as colonists began to adopt the philosophies of the European Enlightenment, including rational and scientific thought. 1630 to 1700, a Yemen society. And when they say a Yemen farmer, that is kind of like your basic everyday farmer who's farming for himself. Proprietors received tracts of land from the general courts of the colonies of Massachusetts and Connecticut, and then distributed the land to male heads of households. All families received some land. Most adult men could vote in town meetings or local government. Largest plots of land went to men of high social status, and the possibility of land ownership made New England a place of great opportunity for men. Because if you were a peasant over in England, you were always a peasant. That was how your life was going to be. And so this is going to give people of non-royal backgrounds or non-noble backgrounds an opportunity to have land. So that is why a lot of them will move to the United States, or what becomes the United States. So that is what I have for this section. One last section for this chapter. Hope you have a great day. Bye.